Hey guys, Ben here with Oddly Armed, and today we're going to be getting on our Mall Ninja and checking out a Kriss Vector, one of the most interesting PCCs out there that has a very innovative recoil management system. So let's go ahead, talk about the history of the Vector and see where it came from. So the most important word when talking about the development of the Vector is going to be recoil, because that's really what this rifle does differently than anything else out there is the Super V system that was developed for it. So to really manage recoil, there have been a lot of different solutions that have been come up with over the years. So of course in the MP5 you have the roller delay blowback system, which utilizes a lighter bolt carrier and bolt than most other blowback firearms, so that reduces recoil in that way. In things like the Ultimax machine gun, it utilizes a system called constant recoil, which essentially is the bolt carrier and the bolt never bottom out against the back of the receiver, so you don't get that energy transfer into the shooter. What they did with the Kriss Vector was entirely different from both of those. They redirect the recoil impulse downward towards the bottom of the receiver, which still gives you the feel of recoil. You're not completely eliminating the recoil. However, the recoil is supposed to be working to your advantage to keep the muzzle of the gun down so you don't end up having a little bit of a walk up between rounds. The Super V system was originally patented back in the 2000s by Renaud Cabrat, who was a Frenchman living in Switzerland and working with Transformational Defense Industries, or TDI, who was the original company that eventually became Kriss USA, and they had already been bringing some guns into the US, the main ones being the Sphinx series of pistols, which is essentially a well-made Swiss clone of the CZ75. Work on the Kriss Vector started back in 2006, and by 2009 they had the finalized design for the first generation of the Vector, which was finally released. And it was a really interesting gun in that it was chambered in 45 ACP, but it had an insane rate of fire at about 1,200 rounds per minute. It also utilized a 2-round burst mechanism as well as full auto, but was meant to be quite a bit more controllable than the other 45 ACP guns which were on the market, and to be fair, pretty dated at that point. So you had basically the M3 grease gun as well as a Thompson, which in terms of controllability kind of paled in comparison to the Kriss Vector. Now, by its official release in 2009, the Kriss Vector was actually already pretty well known, and it really owes that to an episode of Future Weapons back in 2007 on the Discovery Channel, which heavily featured a prototype from TDI at the time of the Kriss Vector, which was where a lot of people got their first introduction, to include myself, to this weapon. It was also heavily featured in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 in 2009 when that released. In 2011, Kriss released a second generation of the Vector, which had quite a few upgrades to it. One of the big ones is going to be the safety selector was changed from a 120-degree throw, which is kind of insane, to a 45-degree throw, so it was a lot more comfortable. The pistol grip was redesigned to be more comfortable. They got rid of a compartment in the upper receiver on the first generation, which was meant to hold a Surefire light. And then they changed the charging handle around a little bit, but the biggest thing they added was different calibers. So the original Gen 1 only came in 45 ACP. With the Gen 2, they expanded to quite a few more calibers. Biggest ones being 9mm, which mine is an example of. There's also 40 Smith & Wesson and 10mm. And later on, they also did a 22 version as well, although that's kind of its own thing. They also introduced different colors of the Kriss Vector. So of course you have flat dark earth. There was also an alpine green as well as a stormtrooper white, which is really cool. And then several different stock options. So you have different upper receivers. Mine's the hinged one that works with the original Kriss Vector stocks, but there's also one that takes standard AR-15 style buffer tubes as well. And in the US, these came in a couple of different forms. They came in a rifle form, which had a 16-inch barrel, of course, which was absolutely ridiculous and had a gigantic faux suppressor over it. It also came in a pistol form that works with a brace, as well as a factory SBR form. Additionally, they had the enhanced model, which had a more extended rail on it, since this has a very short receiver, so you don't have a lot of rail space to work with up front. In 2024, Kriss came out with a third generation of the Kriss Vector, which had a couple of new updates to it. Biggest ones being the handguard added M-lock instead of this Picatinny rail style, with the ability to bolt on extra pick rails to the side. They also lighten the weight a little bit on it, and they introduced the ability to change out the pistol grip for standard AR-15 ones. And while the Vector was originally designed to be a military weapon, it really hasn't seen that much adoption by military or police agencies around the world. That being said, it has been adopted by a couple of countries. Bangladesh adopted it for the army as well as their police in very limited numbers. Panama also adopted it for their national police. And Thailand, the Royal Thai Army as well as the Royal Thai Police also utilize the Kriss Vector in some way. You're probably not going to be seeing a lot of them in military use, but they do exist. That's about all we have to talk about for the history of the Kriss Vector. It really doesn't have a huge military lineage. It's mostly been on the US and Canadian civilian markets. Real quick, I want to give a big shout out to the Echo Valley Training Center in Cape on Hill, West Virginia, where I did the testing for this gun. If you're in the DC area, please check them out. Also, I just wanted to let you guys know that I did start a Patreon for the channel since ammo costs are starting to make my fiance want to leave me. So if you guys feel like contributing a couple of bucks for ammo, I would really appreciate it, but of course there's no pressure to do so. Let's kick off the ratings with accuracy, where the Kriss Vector is going to get a 4. At 25 yards, using 147 grain Longman ammunition, I got a 3.5 MOA group with this gun, which is actually very impressive considering it's a PCC with about a 5.5-inch barrel. Next up we have Aftermarket, where I'm going to give the Kriss Vector a 3. So it is fairly limited on what kind of parts you can get for it. So of course, companies making parts, we're going to start off with Kriss themselves. They make different stock options. If you want the original hinge style of stock, if you have a Gen 2 Kriss Vector, you're going to have to order it from them because these originally come with the AR buffer tube style of stock. So you need to get that upper receiver to work with this, which is my favorite setup for this. But they also have other options. The Gen 3 has a different style of folding stock, but you can get a Picatinny rail adapter, different brace options for this from Kriss. You can get side rails from it for the front of the handguard if you want to add lights. There's also options for other handguards as well if you want like the enhanced style of handguard. If you want to go super Mall Ninja, they also have red anodized parts, so have fun with that. And speaking of Mall Ninja, Strike Industries also makes a M-LOK handguard for these as well. Haga Defense also has an HD A3 adapter for the Kriss Vector, so if you want to throw one of their stocks or braces on there, that's an option. Double Tap Triggers also makes a binary trigger for the Vector if you feel like increasing your rate of fire. And then Custom Smith Manufacturing also makes a tailhook brace adapter for these. When it comes to durability, I'm going to give the Kriss Vector a 3. And these have a bit of reputation for breaking parts over the years. So for one, I've seen videos where people have had issues with the stock buttons for these hinged receiver stocks breaking on them. So that is something to be concerned about. And then also the ejection port for these has a metal insert in there. And I've seen a couple of reports of people actually cracking those inserts. And then additionally, I've seen some reports too about the lower receiver actually having cracks in the side of the polymer itself. Some of that could just be an issue from actually molding the polymer itself and not necessarily a crack in the receiver, but that is something that's been brought up a couple of times. Next up we have Ergonomics, where I'm going to give the Kriss Vector a 3. So this is a very unique firearm as far as the controls go. So starting from the front, we do have this massive, very long charging handle. Now that's actually pretty necessary because the bolt on this is actually pretty hard to pull back. So you have to get both fingers on there to charge it, and again, it's going to be very stiff. So you can see in there into the chamber, but overall the charging handle is not too bad. You can see it does fold to the front, so it doesn't really get in the way. But if you do have something on the side rail here, like a light, this massive charging handle will get in the way of that. Now, the biggest problem people generally have with these are going to be the controls on the side here. So you have our magazine release. So of course this utilizes standard Glock magazines, and that's a good thing. Anything Glock 17 or up, capacity-wise, is going to work in the Kriss Vector. And I'll go ahead and throw that in there. But the biggest problem is that's going to be on the left side, right where all of your hand is supposed to be going if you don't have a foregrip. Again, mine is an SBR, so I can put a vertical foregrip on here, which actually relieves most of the ergonomic issues I have with this gun. But if you just use this textured surface here for the pistol, then you run the risk of accidentally hitting that button and dropping your magazine out, which I've seen multiple videos of people doing. Now another issue here is going to be your bolt catch bolt release, which is this ping pong style paddle here. So if you go ahead and press the forward part, that'll drop your bolt. Now the issue you have here, again, if your hand is up on the receiver where all this texturing is, your thumb is basically going to be writing on this. So that's going to be an issue. It's either going to not lock back or, well, generally just not lock back if you have your hand in this position here. So that is a concern. Again, if you have a foregrip on here, that completely alleviates that. One cool thing though, if I drop the magazine out, with your charging handle, if you pull all the way back, then it is perfect right here to be able to hit the back side of this ping pong paddle, so you can go ahead and lock back your bolt. So that's probably the easiest way to do that. Now moving back to the safety selector, it is ambidextrous on both sides of the receiver here. It's actually very nice. I actually like the way this works here. It's tactile, it's fairly short throw, so I really don't have any complaints about that. Now for the hinge stock here, we just have a giant button here on the left side, and it's going to go ahead and fold around to the right side. And the stock actually locks underneath that little divot right there. So we can just, or on top of it, and it's just being held there in place. You just have to pull it out, lock it back into place, and that's basically all we have to go over for controls. When it comes to maintenance, I'm going to give the Vector a 4. For disassembly, it's actually very, very easy on this gun. You basically just have to pull out 4 separate push pins on the receiver, and you can separate the upper and the lower receiver, as well as pull out the bolt and the bolt carrier and return spring, all that stuff straight out the bottom of the receiver. So that is very nice and easy to do on this gun. As far as actually getting in there and cleaning stuff, it is a little bit tight in some areas, particularly in the lower receiver and getting in to clean out like the magwell area, but it's not too bad. Now, as far as replacing parts goes for the Kriss Vector, Kriss actually does have quite a few replacement parts in stock most of the time, so if something does break on this, which has definitely been known to happen, there's a good chance you're going to be able to get a part to actually replace that with. When it comes to modularity, I'm going to give the Vector a 3. So starting off with stock options, again, you have a couple of different receivers, one of which takes a AR buffer tube, so you have a myriad of options from that. You also have the hinge receiver for the original style of stock. The new 3rd generation version of the Vector has a Picatinny rail attachment point on it, so that's another option for you. But as far as pistol grips go, you're kind of locked in with what you got here on the Gen 2 and the Gen 1. The Gen 3 does have a swappable pistol grip, so you can throw whatever AR grip you want on there and make it absolutely hideous. Now, as far as magazine options go, again, this utilizes standard Glock double-stack single-feed magazines. I will say that I don't generally like PCCs that utilize Glock magazines. However, for the Vector, it was really designed around it, so I don't see it as much of an issue compared to like an AR that uses Glock magazines. Now, as far as caliber exchanges go on this, that's kind of an interesting subject because they used to sell caliber conversion kits, so I could go from 9 to 40, or you could go from 45 to 10 millimeter. The issue with that is the lower receiver, the part that has the barrel in it, as well as the bolt and the carrier, is going to be the serialized part for the Kriss Vector. So if you wanted to be able to swap between calibers, especially if you have an SBR, you're going to have to pay a tax stamp for both of those lower receivers. So that, while you can swap calibers on it, it's a bit of a pain to actually do that. And in terms of handguards for the Gen 2 and the Gen 1, there's really not many options. You can throw the side rails on there, but you're pretty much stuck with what you got. There are some extensions out there if you want to have a little bit more room from Kriss or from Strike Industries and add M-Lock to it. But from the factory, you're pretty limited. In terms of price, I'm going to give the Vector a 4, and that's particularly for the pistol version of this gun. It's going to come in around $1,300 if you can find a good deal on it, so it's not particularly expensive. When it comes to shooting characteristics, I'm going to give the Kriss Vector a 4. Starting off with the trigger, it's actually not too bad on this gun. It does have quite a bit of take-up, but the actual wall and release is nice and crisp, so this is one of the faster PCC triggers out there. Now, as far as weight goes, it comes in at about 7 pounds, 10 ounces, so it's not super lightweight, but I didn't find it to be a very big issue when I was using this for competition shooting. Now, when we talk about the recoil impulse, does the Super V system actually work? And I'm happy to say, yes, it does. You can absolutely tell a difference, even with the 9mm version, with that Super V system redirecting the recoil downwards. So you still feel the recoil. You can still tell that bolt is moving fairly quickly on this gun, and it does have somewhat of a stiff recoil. However, it doesn't have virtually any muzzle climb at all. So you can shoot this incredibly quickly and not really have any issues of coming off at target. And I've heard some people say that the Kriss is only worth it if you're going to get either a 45 or a 10 mil, or if you're going to have it in full auto. But I kind of disagree with that after shooting it in matches, because this gun is incredibly easy to keep on target and shoot quickly. And honestly, I can probably shoot this as quickly and accurately as I can an MP5. Now, when it comes to shooting the Vector suppressed, I've used two different cans on this. For my full back pressure can, that's going to be my Rugged Obsidian 45. And with that can on there, this is definitely going to be a bit gassy. So you're going to feel a bit of the gas. You're going to be getting it to the face a little bit. There's actually a cutout in the stock where the trigger's at. So I think some gas actually escapes there and hits you in the face a little bit. But overall, it's not terrible. It does still sound pretty good. I've also used this with my B&T TP9 can with a 3-lug adapter on it, which actually is very, very pleasant to shoot because that's reduced back pressure, and then also has massive amount of volume to it, so it sounds very, very nice. And overall, the Kriss Vector is actually a pretty good suppressor host. Getting into reliability, I'm going to give the Vector a 3. And these have been known to have quite a few different reliability issues over the years. So for me, I think the biggest thing that causes issues with this guns are going to be the magazines that you run with them. So for mine, I've been using just Glock brand Glock magazines, so either the extended magazines or the original 17 or 19 round magazines, and I really haven't had many issues. I have had a couple of stovepipes and failures to feed, stuff like that, but it hasn't been like extravagant. Every other round is going to be a stovepipe. Now, most of the issues I've seen other people have with these has been when they've been using the actual Kriss extended magazines. So basically, those are a modification to standard Glock magazines to hold a lot more rounds. But I've seen quite a few issues with those, and I would honestly avoid those and just go for standard capacity actual Glock magazines. When it comes to weight, I'm going to give the Vector a 2, and it is quite heavy, coming in at about 7 pounds. Now, one of the more awkward parts about that weight is its distribution. With the Vector, it is very front heavy, so you really notice it when you're actually using this gun, and that's primarily because all the weight's going to be in the lower receiver, which is in the front half. The stock and the upper weigh basically nothing, so it does make it feel kind of awkward and front heavy. And when we go ahead and add up all 10 categories, we come out with a score of 33 for the Kriss Vector, putting it into the B tier. Now, some of the things I really like about this gun are it's surprisingly accurate, all things considered. Maintenance isn't bad on it. The price is actually fairly inexpensive. And then the shooting characteristics are very nice, and the Super V system actually does work quite well. For the downsides on the Vector, the aftermarket for it is fairly limited. It's also not going to be the most durable or reliable 9mm PCC I've ever used. And then the modularity on it's a bit questionable due to the lower receiver actually being the serialized component for this gun. And then it also is ergonomically pretty awkward compared to most PCCs out there. And finally, we're going to talk about where I think the Kriss Vector belongs on the cool tiers, and I'm going to go ahead and throw it right up into the A tier. And it really has popped up quite a bit in pop culture, even though in real world use it really doesn't get seen that often. As far as movies go, the Vector's popped up in Resident Evil Retribution, the newer Total Recall, and then also in a couple of the newer Marvel Avengers movies. And of course, as far as TV goes, gotta talk about Future Weapons. That's where I first learned about this gun, and really that's the most popular TV appearance of it. When it comes to video games, the Vector has popped up quite a bit over the years, and of course we gotta go back to 2009 with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, where this was one of the most popular guns in the game, and really where its fame got started. And since then, it's been featured in a ton of Call of Duty games. Basically, any of the modern ones are gonna have a Kriss Vector in them. And then another really popular series that pops up a lot is going to be Far Cry. So it's been in Far Cry 3, 4, 6, New Dawn, a bunch of them. And it's also popped up in other games such as Tarkov. Alright guys, and that's going to do it for my review on the Kriss Vector. So thank you for checking out the video. Please stick around for next week when I post the disassembly video for this gun, which is pretty interesting. Like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and I'll have more stuff coming out here for you guys soon.